Hey, Shakiel Mahjouri here for SB Nation and the season premiere of The Insiders, where we peel back the curtain on the MMA industry with help from some of its biggest media members. And what better way to start than with the commander-in-chief of donks everywhere? His Twitter mentions throw down harder than my family at Thanksgiving. He is, of course, from The Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM and Showtime Digital's Morning Kombat. Luke Thomas, how are you, sir?
I am okay. Good to be here.
Well, I'll hope to uplift your attitude a little bit by the end of it, but I understand it's late. You've been working hard, so I really appreciate you making the time today, man.
No worries.
All right, now, before we dive deep into this, I just want to ask you, what has been the most frustrating point to get across throughout your career, the PED stuff or the COVID stuff?
Got to be the COVID stuff. Because the PED stuff, that is a very difficult thing to prove. Mm-hmm. And even for folks who may not know, obviously I have very, what do you want to call them, unusual views as it relates to the mainstream view on performance-enhancing drugs. And I won't go into the long of it, but the short is that I used to not be that way. Mm-hmm. And then I began to find books from scholars who would have these, true scholars, like various university professors, who would have these different ideas about why we're doing everything wrong, and it sounded totally implausible. And then the more I read it, I was like, oh my God, I think this is really true, to the point where I became converted, at least to, they're all very different, but to certain versions of it. If I had never gone through the process of digging into, frankly, esoteric work, and much of it academic, which means it's bland and hard to read, and if I had never done that, I would have certainly never been convinced. And I think the way I initially handled it while trying to bring some of those ideas into MMA, I probably did that really wrong. It's a very argumentative kind of thing rather than trying to, sort of thread the needle a little bit.
Yeah.
The COVID one was way more surprising, and frankly, I think actually a much tougher thing to fix, because if I had enough time and I had enough information, I like my chances with most reasonable people, at least to move you off of whatever your view on PEDs might be, assuming it's the opposite of mine. I mean, I get you to agree, but I could probably shift it. What I found with the COVID-19 situation is that it has become part. I mean, God, this country's so broken, right? Because the issue has become fully politicized. Well, if it's become politicized, that means it's also a function now of your identity, because political identity has become synonymous with identity regularly. Mm-hmm. And so now I'm arguing against who you are, and that is a virtually unwinnable position to find yourself in. I did not appreciate that at the beginning of this. Now I have a much clearer understanding of it. At least I think I do anyway. And so how do you argue against something where the news you get, and the reason why you seek out that news, is because it speaks to you, and you think it's better, and you think it's more reliable, and then there's this network of people who are reconfirming it, and maybe your neighbors and your friends and your coworkers. You have this, and the sense of self about where you eat, what you shop, what kind of music you listen to. All of it's tied into that. I can't really fight that on Twitter. That's very, very difficult.
Yes, well, and I appreciate you for trying, but I know sometimes it's not worth the squeeze. Let's move on. So I'm going to give a little bit of these were kind of filmed out of order, so I'm going to give a little bit of a preview into episode 2 with Brian Campbell. I was kind of talking to him about your relationship, and he told me a story. Yes, you're very heterosexual, yes, friendship only, tip-to-tip relationship. And right. He was telling me about the first time he was invited to come and do the MMA beat, and how his impression leaving that first shoot with you guys was, I guess that's never happening again. Luke Thomas must hate my guts. So I want to get your side of the story. What was your first impression of shooting that episode of the MMA beat with Brian Campbell?
I don't even remember. But it was kind of funny because I can tell you I've never had that feeling about him, ever. He thinks we're more different than we are. And to be clear, we are very different, but we're not as different as he sometimes imagines us to be. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of plays games with his head a little bit, which I've told him, straight up about it. But it's funny. A lot of people come to me and they're like, oh, you guys must hate each other. Like, you got stuck with him on Morning Kombat or something. Like, I'm like, stuck? I handpicked him, like I had this meeting with Showtime, and I'm like, I know exactly the right guy for this. Now, I do think it's true that I think it was Chuck Mindenhall,
Yes,
who put the bug in my ear about inviting him. I just did not know where he lived, and Chuck did, because I think they're both Connecticut guys. So that part might be true. It didn't actually occur to me, but dude, he was one of the strongest members of that panel ever. Forget about the era he was in. He was always consistently good. It's just when you show up and you're like, have you seen this video of these two Slovenian guys who were weighing in? They wanted to touch dicks. And I'm like, well, maybe you'll leave that stuff to the side.
for sure. Well, and I think the MMA space is a lot better thanks to this mutual partnership that you guys have developed. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the impact of morning combat. I have this question that I will be asking just about everyone who does this little series with me, and that is, why does it seem that MMA media is so behind on creativity, especially in this internet age? Some have argued with me that, especially now with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of outlets and a lot of reporters have been forced to come up with more creative ways to get the information across. But would you agree with the idea that the MMA media has been really slow to move on and come up with different, more interesting ways to get information across? And why do you think that is?
They might be, but like, who would you say was good at it? Like, what sports media really leads in that regard?
That's fair. I guess none of them.
Yeah, none of them. They're saying that, and I could be wrong about that. In fact, a lot of times when I see sports media experiment with like, "Ooh, let's try this," wacky, unconventional approach, it sucks balls, for lack of a better description. It's not to say that I think what you're pointing out is that there's a lot of content that seems unnecessary. For sure, that's true. There's a lot of content that seems redundant. Existing for the sake of just inertia and no other reason. I certainly would agree with that, but to me that speaks probably more to a business model. Some creativity, fair enough, but I don't know. And looking around, like, if you think MMA media lacks creativity, you should go read boxing sites. Buddy, it's not that bad over here.
Fair enough. Let me actually, you know what, since we're on we'll get to it. One thing, so let's get into the meat of this discussion a little bit. I don't know if you saw, I live in Vancouver, Canada, and so when UFC Vancouver Gaethje versus Cerrone happened, Todd Duffy had a very peculiar scrum with the media. I don't know if you saw it, but it basically turned into, for those who are unaware, Todd Duffy basically just came out and started criticizing the media for tearing fighters down, constantly writing negative headlines, and it turned into a little bit of a, back and forth open forum, although he didn't seem too interested in really getting into it. So what I did when I uploaded that interview on Facebook, I put a poll and I asked, who is most responsible for bringing fighters down? Is it the promotions, the media, or the fans? And it was a resounding thumbs down for the media, almost unanimous. Yeah. Why do you think the public has that impression of MMA media, and do you think it's justified?
That's a complicated one. Partly, yeah, I do think it is justified. And MMA media is allergic to self-examination. They can't stand the idea that they've done anything wrong, and that is, to me, a dramatic mistake. It is true that there are really powerful forces, perhaps unfairly steering public opinion in a way that does not reflect the actual true job that MMA media does. I'm certainly willing to consider that. I am equally willing to consider that MMA media has dug its own grave and absolutely refuses to look. Every time here's how you know this, dude. Every time I bring up a criticism of a fighter, some fighter might say something, maybe not, fans might say something. Every time I bring up a criticism of the MMA media, however anodyne, they jump at me, like, immediately. They cannot accept the idea that they've done anything wrong, or they'll pay lip service to, like, the marginal stuff. Yes, maybe it's this, but it's not really this. No, it's really this. So certain ways, which I think they've alienated the audience, could be something as simple as we indicated before, right? Redundant content, maybe lacking creativity, but like, why is this here kind of content? But that's really not the source of the issue. It is true that, again, there might be powerful forces swaying opinion. It is also true that there's fans of the sport, they don't really understand the media's role, right? Where they have a competing set of interests made perfectly clear, like when they have these press conferences that are just pep rallies that the media is invited to and asked to. Like, it's weird. They're like puppets being pulled and they never seem to like look around and say, is this good for us to be here? Do we look good being here? Are we sending the right message about what we do when we do this? And the answer is, of course you're not. You're absolutely doing the exact opposite. More to the point, dude, MMA media, this is the one criticism I'll push back on fighters a little bit. They're like, they get after MMA a lot. And Ta had two criticisms. One was they don't write enough about substantive issues. He was right about that. Secondly, he was like, you tear down fighters all the time. I had him on my show that week, and I completely disagree with him, which was, Todd, if you think the MMA media is bad, you should see literally any other media. It's far worse. And here's the point. Dude, they are MMA media relative to virtually any other one are, I mean, bootlickers to the nth degree. That's not true in totality. It's not true in every case with every person. In fact, it's not nearly as true as people make it out to be. But relative to what you see in other sports, it's terrible. It's terrible. They have laid down a role of being totally obsequious. They don't hardly do any adversarial media. They go to these press conferences where they are literally props, and they wonder why people think of them as props. Think of them as people who are your job is to facilitate my enjoyment as a fan. Why would a fan think that? Because you told them that. Everything you do gives that impression. So of course, by the time you actually need to speak up and the time you need to push back, this is a totally foreign thing that they've never experienced before. So yes, it's not one or the other. It's a series of difficult challenges, but are the media complicit in part of their own problem? 1,000%.
Now, one of the things that I think a lot of media outlets really banded together on was the UFC not pressing forward with the original plans for UFC 249 in the midst of this pandemic. And they did get a lot of pushback from fans and, of course, Dana White. And you mentioned on one of your shows how probably the thing that really made an impact in the UFC postponing the show was that New York Times piece, and how sort of the impact of MMA media is pretty negligible, and probably the fan base who's firing off on Twitter, again, is a minority of the fans that watch MMA programming. And so what I want to ask you is, what do you think media and fans can do to help make meaningful change that will benefit fighters in the long run?
Like in concert with one another?
Either or, how independently, doesn't matter. I just find that it got me thinking, how much sway does the media in MMA specifically, and fans who want to prop up fighters, how much power do they really have in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, here's the case. MMA media just bitching into a vacuum, or even okay, I'm being I'm being jaundiced here. Even making a legitimate good faith criticism of something, not even being bad mouthing about it, but just like, hey, here's something I think is really bad in the industry. We should address it. By itself doesn't do much. The only time it really does anything is, and this does not happen very often, but it sometimes can happen, is if it bubbles up and then the story becomes big enough that the bigger players in media begin to pay attention. Kevin Draper was the guy in the New York Times. I'd asked him, like, how did this story get on your radar? And I guess he's kind of always got an eye to look towards MMA at it because other sites or voices were speaking up. I don't know. That is sometimes how you see it. If you want to do for the fans, I don't know. I'm really hesitant to regulate fandom. I don't know that you can, except for its excesses where, people are fighting in a crowd or hurling epithets at competitors or something. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what the answer is there. But on the media side, I think, listen, a lot of the things some of the fighter criticisms to me are just totally bankrupt, like about how, they're really doing. I mean, there's some parts of it. I saw just a part of complaining about a headline, and the headline wasn't great to his defense. I didn't ask, but I kind of wanted to be like, well, how would you write the headline? And my hunch is that the fighters will write a headline torpedo the business. Right? I mean, not intentionally, but that it doesn't speak to the realities. Like, the reason why they're writing the headline that way is because you have to do enough of those in that way to make this thing work. That's the argument to have, right? It's like, well, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I guess the answer I would say is, I think there's plenty of positive stories. Could always be more. But to me, this is the thing that I tell everybody. It's like, how do I cover fighters? What is the context in which I operate? And I'm going to get this wrong at times, of course, but this is the general North Star. You have to think about it every time you cover one of them, which is, Not in every case, not all the time. Every way they are hit with a disadvantage.
Yeah.
In virtually every instance, and the problems in which they are working at a disadvantage tie into one another. So I'd use the Ion Cutelaba story in Virginia, where there was a bad stoppage, at least a perceived bad stoppage. So he gets a loss on his record. He gets half his money in Macedonia or wherever he is. And they had denied his appeal. And the way in which they had denied it was because they write rules in such a way where did the referee in his own best interest work for health and safety of the fighter? Well, of course they did. That's not the point. The point is, was that decision a good one or not? And they write the rules. They rig it in such a way where the fighter can't have anything and really challenge the occupational competency of this government entity. So this is my point. All the problems kind of work into one another. You have to really fundamentally accept managers to the gatekeepers at the state commissions, to virtually the promoters, to virtually everyone. They have the upper hand on fighters almost in every way. And we pay a lot of lip service, and we do this dance to them, and we exalt them. We exalt them with our words because I think we all know we have a guilty conscience the way they're treated. However, that in every case you are required to get on bended knee and tell them things here. But it does mean that if you're going to cover issues of substance, you have to operate under the context of what the reality tells you. And the reality tells you that the fighters are uniquely disadvantaged virtually in every case. And that, if you really accept that as your driving principle of coverage, that'll take care of the problem in most cases.
Okay, I like it. And why do you think it is that, what do you think is the benefit to the commissions to rig the system in such a way that fighters can't get their appeals?
I mean, why would any organization, particularly a government one, write rules in such a way as to never have to answer to anybody? I mean, that's sort of
fair enough.
I mean, I don't know. So they don't have to answer to anybody, sort of the answer. And because the fighters really have no way of pressing back against them.
Yeah.
That's why you always, every time, they don't really do them as much anymore because USADA seems to handle most of the suspensions. But back when the Nevada was doing them and they were airing on Fight Pass, you'd see these fighters go in there, and maybe they're guilty, maybe they're not, but they go in there hat in hand, bro. And the reason why they're doing it is because it's part of this song and dance where they have to just get on bended knee. And the one guy who fought back, Nick Diaz, they tried to hammer him for life at first, and then 5 years, and it was only enormous outrage at the radical injustice of it all that made them reconsider. But just think about that. That's the mechanism of justice for fighters, is that the people have to lose their shit for them to get any chance at fairness. And this is over weed infractions. Dude, the whole system is rigged against fighters. And until you really accept that, your coverage will always be a little bit off.
I think you have been one of the foremost champions of speaking truthfully, and I think attempting to educate a lot of people on the injustices in the sport. Obviously, people will talk about how John Jones doesn't want to talk to you anymore, but from
he ain't the only one.
Yeah, I know, but from your point of view, behind the scenes, I think you're very, very pro fighter, and the things you say are often very pro fighter. The problem is they conflict with how promoters, managers have managed to oppress fighters. Behind the scenes, are there any fighters that have kind of shown appreciation for how you're putting yourself out there to raise awareness on these issues?
Sure, I get outreach. People reach out to me all the time.
That's good.
And I had several during this whole melee on social media who expressed profound gratitude. On the other hand, I had some other ones reach out and had some not nice things to say. So it's not like the message is getting through every time, but it's not, I can't go through life being like, well, I have to cross every T and dot every I. I have to do the best job that I can with the information that I have and the time that's in front of us. And I think over time, the people who are willing to look at it will get it. And I've also had some that literally, this is true, dude. I've had some be in camp and they were all, amped up. And then when camp was over, they went back and revisited some things I had said. And they had a different opinion at that point. So you got to give these guys time,
for sure,
as well, man. They're under a lot of pressure to perform. So I try not to take it too personally. I really don't. I try not to get too upset about it. I've seen a lot of times a year or two passes and they just kind of forget and they're cool again. So what can you do? You just do your job, and that's what it is.
Let's talk a little bit about, speaking of jobs, some of the work you did prior to where you are now in your career. Let's touch first on MMA Fighting. Have you ever publicly stated why exactly you left fighting?
I think I've kind of hinted at it. I mean, the thing is this: I really like what they're doing now. I think it's a new generation of talent.
Agreed.
And this guy Mike Heck over there, boy, he's doing a great job, isn't he?
Mike's terrific, man.
He's just unbelievable. And then Esther and Casey are just they're born winners. Those guys over there, Jose and Pizzi, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a bunch of people.
Alex
Guillermo
Cayley, Jed Meshew.
of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on forever. And to me, it's like you had a lot.
Mike
The reasons are
Chiappetta.
personal. Yeah, of course. Chiappetta has been there since I was in it too, before me even. I mean, and Dave Meltzer is still there. Don't forget about him. But the thing I was trying to say is I've got my own reasons for them, and I'm sure they drive a lot of gossip. But what I'd rather say is I'm in a better place, and I like that there's a new crop of talent that doesn't have to sit under the thumb of me and Chuck and Sean and Mark and Ariel, where we're going to take, it's like the Supreme Court, man. You don't get a seat until one of them dies,
Yeah.
So, yes, I know that it creates for a lot of headlines. Everyone just left all at once. One day we'll tell the story, I suppose. But what I'd rather say is I'm very impressed with their rebound, and I'm so glad there's a generation of young guys over there, and ladies, I should say as well, who are doing great work.
And I appreciate you saying that, because I've had to preface every time I ask this question with someone, list off all the names of the people there who are doing terrific work. But this is kind of the follow-up to that, which is I'm glad to see that fighting is in such a great place with the talent they have at their disposal right now. During that transition period, what was going through your mind when you saw just about everyone leave? Because I think a lot of their audience base was very worried for the future of that website.
Sure. What was I thinking about? Was I thinking about in terms of me, or was I thinking about in terms of the site?
The site.
The site?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, you broke up there on Skype. What was I thinking about when I saw everybody leave? I think it'd be natural to say, yeah, I had some concerns about what my role would be and, what my place would be. A lot of people think people will ascribe literal fantasy to my situation when they don't agree with me. So, for example, there was this, I think I saw it maybe 6 months ago or maybe even a year ago. Be like, oh, Luke got fired from MMA Fighting. No, I didn't. I got offered a brand new deal, and I didn't take it. It was a good deal. It was a great deal. There's nothing wrong with the deal other than I got a better one, and so I took it. Basically, yeah, of course, I was worried about the site, but I mean, here's the thing, and I had some talks with people internally at the company. You got to understand, now, the whole business, sports-wide, everyone is suffering from lack of ad rev, right? I mean, it's not any kind of secret. But if you just look at the place that MMA Fighting holds at SB Nation and Vox Media, it's a crown jewel for any number of reasons, for traffic, for ad rev, for whatever. You just knew it didn't matter who subbed out. It was going to be a next man up scenario. So it wasn't like I thought the institution, there was no way I knew it would suffer in some of the more dire pronouncements. Obviously, the transition is never that easy. So, yeah, I mean, I thought I had some, I looked into it in that way, but, you got to live your life for yourself. But at the same time, I was comfortable that when I had made my decision, I was not sabotaging anyone's career.
Sure.
And, all the people who were above me are still all there to proof of that. So I think in the end, it worked out the way it needed to.
For sure. And let's quickly touch on another website that you are very familiar with, and that is Bloody Elbow. Of course,
Yep.
I write for Bloody Elbow and MMA Mania. You said something once upon a time that caught my ear, and I never got to follow up with anyone about it, which was you recommended that Bloody Elbow change their name at some point, and you said because they did and it's caused a lot of problems. Can you tell me what those are? Because I have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, here's just in one example. So I got control of Bloody Elbow from an editorial perspective in February of 2006, 2007, something like that. One of those years. And my literal first order of business was you need to change his name. And of course, I was outvoted by the geniuses who thought they knew better. And then ad deal after ad deal would get scuttled, or promotions didn't know the way they felt about it, or I remember Vox at the time, it was just SB Nation. They did a deal with USA Today called the USA Today excuse me, the USA Today SB Nation Consensus MMA rankings. They were supposed to be the Bloody Elbow rankings. But of course, does USA Today wish to partner with that? Of course they don't, right? Nobody does. So you know, it ended up. It's just it's fine now, basically. But you know, you got to remember during the time when it was on that come up, everyone was on pins and needles about it, right? And so the sport, that is, not really the site. So I thought it was a bad idea. It was a bad idea. It absolutely should have been changed, but you know, what are you gonna do?
Here we are. It's still. Anytime I tell people what websites I work for, it requires a longer explanation when I get to Bloody Elbow. So, like you said, what are you going to do?
Of course it does.
Now, let's touch on something you brought up earlier. And you've said how, like, you know, you're friends with Chael. You may disagree with him on some points, like submission, underground grappling. Same with Brendan Schaub and his stance on COVID. And you've touched very often recently on this idea of a culture war that's kind of bled into everything we do, and how everything from the food we eat to the shows we watch are kind of tied to our identity. What is the fundamental flaw with the idea that you can't like someone or be friends with someone else just because they have a conflicting value?
Yeah, I mean, at some point they're going to be so far gone that it's not possible, right? And not Chael or Brendan specifically, but in your life, there can be disagreement, and then there can be people who undertake truly heinous acts, or you know, really espouse something vile that you just at that point no longer can abide by. But what I have found is a lot of times, man, I've been so wrong about the way your natural instinct when you disagree with somebody, especially in the social media world and on social media in particular, is just fire and brimstone. And maybe on occasion that's really warranted for your more odious creatures. But I have found that if you just do that all the time, you know, it's just not, for lack of a better description, it's just not very effective. It's not a very effective way to win an argument. It's not a very effective way to convince people. And again, some of these issues are, I worry a little bit beyond the point of rational disagreement or agreement. But I go back to the PED when that was such a lesson for me, because now I've poisoned the well, because so many people like got a chance to tune in, hear what I had to say. It was a lot of yelling, and then they tune out, and I can't get them back. I don't know how to get them back. And it's not that people even since then have had their disagreements with USADA about some of the ways things have been handled. And why did USADA change some of their policies? Is it because they're just benevolent creatures, or because there was media blowback? I would believe it's probably not just mine, but in general, media blowback. But I fucked that one up. And so rather than just trying to beat everyone over the head with a stick, maybe it's better to like have a consistent dialogue by which you can convince people. And you know, if they cross certain red lines, fine. But I don't think I've gotten to that point yet, personally.
For sure. And that's very honest, and self-reflection is always key in these sort of situations. Let's start moving on to the later stuff a little bit, since we got to the meat of this conversation. Now, there's a portion of your fan base that's always looking to get the gossip on John Jones or Ariel Helwani or Brendan Schaub or Chael Sonnen or whoever else they want you to badmouth. I'm not going to ask you about any of them, but there's one piece of info I'm curious about. I was scrolling through a Ask Me Anything on Reddit you did about 6 years ago, and you were asked about kind of your worst encounter with a fighter, and you mentioned Forrest Griffin.
Yeah.
Has that relationship been repaired since? Have you talked to Forrest at all since then?
So yeah, it's probably, again, people just kind of move on because baggage is heavy. You know, it's just people just stop caring after a while. But I had an interview with him that went real bad, and I don't think it was my fault, but I'm sure he completely disagrees, and whatever. I don't care anymore. Forrest is doing just fine. He has a great job at the PI. He's a success story in every way imaginable. And if he's healthy and he's happy and he's had a great life, well, then that's really all that matters. I saw him at a God, what was it? It was like some tequila release party that was like a sponsor for UFC. I don't remember when that was, and I was right next to him. And he pulls up right next to me on the bar and just looked at me, and then smiled and didn't say a word. I looked at him. I was like, "What's up?" You know, I said, "What am I going to?" You know, he's my age. Like, what do you do? Like, yes, he could beat the shit out of me, but we're two 40-year-old guys. Like, you know, is that what this is about anymore? You know?
Only if you're Kimbo and Dada, but
yeah, exactly. But they were paid, you know, so we'd have to do it for free. And of course, he would beat me within an inch of my life within 5 seconds. But I just don't think he cared anymore. he just he just kind of smiled. I think he recognized it was me, and then he was just like, "Ah, fuck it, who cares?" So it is what it is.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. You are a man, I think, amongst a lot of the MMA fans who's got a big vocabulary and a refined taste. You love your critical movie darlings. But I want to ask, what is your guilty pleasure? And to put myself out there, I will say I am not above grabbing a couple taquitos from 7-Eleven and binging Jersey Shore. So
Jersey Shore, really?
It's so bad, though. It's so
let me ask you, how old are you?
24.
Oh my
yes,
god!
This was a big influence in my high school years, and I recognize how ridiculous that is to say, but I can't help it. It's just, it's like, you know how you can't turn away from a train wreck? It's basically that.
So here, you say that. Let me give you a look into the ghost of Christmas future. Right?
Please.
When you get to be my age, and again I'm 40, you will see that that's no longer possible. Like this allure of okay, I still watch Tiger King. But I'll say this: the allure of the train wrecks that I watched in my 20s. So, for example, Jersey Shore was also famous in or I think maybe 30s or something. I cannot fathom that. Today, I was on YouTube trending, and there's this new song by Lil Pump called Illuminati, and I was literally, I said to myself, I was like, why? Well, actually, I don't want to piss people off, but I thought to myself, it's like, no one gives a flying fuck about a 40-year-old white dad's opinion on hip hop.
Yeah.
Hip hop belongs to the generation that makes it, and that's theirs. That's what they love. But it was so foreign to me. I wished death upon everyone in the video in my mind, which is, I'm not saying in reality, just in my mind for a second. So you'll see that the stuff you're watching now at my age, you literally cannot even go through the motions of it anymore. It's just not possible. Okay, guilty pleasure. What would I say is a guilty pleasure? Well, I can't really go out because nothing's open.
That's true.
When I go out, I like to have a good cocktail, like a well-made, whatever it is. Boulevardier. Who doesn't like the favorite white guy drink? The old-fashioned,
Yeah.
Whatever. So, but I'll venture out. I'll get decent stuff. That's not really a thing you can do right now. So when I'm at home, bro, it's the rock gut. I'll put together Jim Beam and Mountain Dew if it gets me through the night. So guilty pleasure is when I go out, I want someone to make me something really nice. At home, I will drink moonshine you make in your tub.
Yeah, it's the shit mix, as the youth calls it.
Here we go. See that? There we go. Brown liquor, my friend.
Terrific. Good. Well, I've got my beer off camera because I was trying to be professional about this, Luke, but just kidding.
I am not professional.
No, well, I would disagree, but okay, let's move on. You've developed quite a few catchphrases over the years, and I'm still trying to find the secret sauce to a good catchphrase, so I would like you to rank the following from favorite to least favorite.
Okay.
Stay frosty, may all your gains be loyal, reveille, and donks.
Donks. You forgot about one I used to do, which was hands up, chin down, let 'em fly.
We'll throw that in because I was hoping to make it an even or an uneven 5.
I'll put that at 5 because that was fun. I did that for a radio show when I was on 106.7 The Fan, and that was my sign off there. And then when I closed that show, I kind of wanted to leave that there. I got it from Phil Baroni. I'll rank donks is just like a thing I throw out, so I'll rank that 4th. I will rank may all your gains be loyal number 1, and then stay frosty 2, reveille, donks. And then the last. I
didn't know how much I liked reveille until they threw it in on the intro, but it sticks.
So the way I used to, oh my god, I used to hate it because in the military you get woken up at just stupid hours with no sleep, and there would always be the person waking you up would not merely say those words, but they would say it in such a way where like they would pretend like they got the best night of sleep ever and that they could not be more bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and that they were looking not merely down on you for how tired you were, but they took pleasure in the misery of your waking up. And it used to, like, I would hear it and it would drive me freaking mad until you get old enough where you just sort of appreciate the absurdity of it all. And now I kind of do, but at the time I was like, I hated it.
Couple things as we wrap up. First, I know you like your foreign films, but you're not all that well versed in your horror movies. And my girlfriend and I have been binging horror movies, so I'm going to give you 3 foreign film horror recommendations. But first, I want your 3 foreign film recommendations. A quick synopsis.
That's a good one. Okay, so these are not necessarily the best 3, but just 3 you have to see that I've really enjoyed. I'd say in the last year or 2. Oh, I got some great ones. I got one that's not accessible. You're gonna have to put on your big boy pants to watch.
Okay.
But two very accessible. The first is was it Los Secretos en sus ojos? Well, it's an. So do you remember the movie? I had Sandra Bullock in it.
Careful, I'm
And I think
24
it was
years
called
old, Luke.
no. It was recent. It was like you're like Sandra Bullock. It's called the original movie is Argentinian, and it's called The Secrets in Their Eyes. I think that's what it's called. They did an American adaptation of it. The American adaptation, it's just not good. It's not very good. The Argentinian version is heart-racingly good. I mean, it is a thriller in every way. When they say things get lost in translation, dude, they mean it. So just look up Argentinian movie, The Secrets in Their Eyes, and watch it in the native language, because Argentinian Spanish just sounds like Italian.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. The other one is called The Insult. It is a Lebanese movie where the Palestinians are like, of the Arab world, they are the most abused even by other Arabs. And there's this guy who's working in Beirut who's a Palestinian, and he insults another guy, and it results in a conflict where the guy gets sent to jail, and there's this like Lebanese societal reflection on how they treat others and for what reasons. And it's this like court drama along with it. It's very, very native to like Lebanese. If you're not Lebanese, and I'm not, but I have some understanding of it, it's going to sound really weird, but it all makes sense within the context in which it operates.
Mm-hmm.
It is a beautiful movie. Really, really first rate, The Insult. And then last but not least, I recommended it to Brian Campbell. I rewatched it the other day. It is just a masterstroke in every word. The best filmmaker of the 20th century, and it's not particularly close. You could take Steven Spielberg. He goes in the short bus compared to this guy. Akira Kurosawa's Ran. Ran is an absolute masterstroke. As I mentioned, the time it was made, I think it was 83. It was the most expensive Japanese movie ever made. The guy's wife died during filming. It is essentially King Lear, mm-hmm. done through the samurai shogun era. It is a masterstroke in every way. 3 hours, and it's a slow burn. But once it gets going, dude, Akira Kurosawa, it takes your breath away to watch a film like that.
Okay, so I'll try and return a few here. Tigers Are Not Afraid, 2019 film, takes place in Mexico. It's about a number of orphans who are victims of the drug war in Mexico, and it kind of takes some elements from Pan's Labyrinth. It's kind of like a dark fantasy twist on... Love
Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, and I think this, either Guillermo del Toro was involved in some capacity, so it's got his seal of approval, as I'm sure. It's quite touching, and these kids lose their parents. They're kind of up against gang members in this Mexican drug cartel, and it's kind of a commentary on how these children are often lost and forgotten as a consequence of the drug war in Mexico. So that's a good one.
Okay.
The Orphanage, I absolutely love. My girlfriend just showed it to me. Kind of comes off as a traditional horror movie. A mother's child goes missing. There seems to be spirits that are possessing the house, but it's got a very... It ends up having quite a literal, very non-fiction ending to it, followed by it ties up on a happy note. It's
like all good horror movies.
Like all good horror. Well, what's nice, there's a lot of misunderstanding in the film, and so it kind of takes you on a journey where you think this is going to be a traditional horror film, and there ends up being a nice emotional note to end on. And the last one is an Iranian language film. It's called Under the Shadows, and it takes place during the Iran-Iraq War. It involves jinns, which are, kind of like genie ghosts, quite common in Iranian culture. And when a house in Tehran is bombed, these negative feelings surrounding the war allow this jinn to enter, and it's a commentary. The jinn is kind of is an illusion, or is a personification of how the war leaves sort of lingering baggage and trauma on the citizens involved in it. So
3 responses, if I may, very quickly.
Yes.
One, Iranian cinema is terribly underrated.
Facts.
Really good.
Facts.
There's a movie I saw recently where a guy's wife got raped, and he went and tried to kill all the people that did it. God, what was the name of that movie? It was so good. They had just moved to the apartment, and she gets raped. I forget about it, but that's the first. Secondly, Los Amores Perros, which has Gael Garcia Bernal in it. Phenomenal. He played Roberto Duran in Manos de Piedra.
Yeah.
And then the movie I was telling you. So the 2015 version is the one that sucked. El Secreto de sus Ojos. That's the one you want to see, because the 2015 version had, who's in this? Nicole Kidman, Julia Roberts, Dean Norris. Well, everyone who I said wasn't in there is in there. Joe Cole, a bunch of donks nobody cares about. I guess it's not Sandra Bullock. Nicole Kidman. It sucked ass. Don't watch that one. Go watch the original Argentinian one.
Perfect. And last thing to end on here, I'll be honest, when I came up with the name The Insiders for this, it's like the first thing that popped into my head and I rolled with it. Last time you and I talked, you told me that your original title for Morning Kombat was going to be The Headliners, until your wife reminded you that it sounds like a really bad like indie rock band.
80s cover
band. What's worse, Insiders or Headliners? And be totally honest with me.
What's worse, Insiders or Headliners? God, Headliners also sounds like some kind of bar at a sad place in Florida, So Insiders is, we started this conversation with a lack of creativity. I will tell you,
it is the worst.
Insiders is not proving that wrong.
You're right.
But Headliners is definitely worse. Yeah. I'll put it that way.
That's okay. I'll give another little insight into a future episode. I asked Dave Meltzer to give me a Meltzer rating on our interview. So this, and nothing you say could have been more nerve-wracking than what Dave Meltzer had to say about our interview. So
what did he give it?
It was good. I will say it was positive feedback. So
okay, good.
I'll take that. But Luke, man, that is all I got for you today. First and foremost, I want to thank you so much for being here. I don't know if you would say this, but I consider you a pillar of this industry. I think you're very important to the future of MMA and especially for the athletes. So I want to thank you for the time today. Real pleasure to pick your brain. For those of you watching, if you like this, there's more coming. We're going to be releasing these every week. The best way to find out about it, subscribe to the SBN MMA YouTube channel. That's SB Nation, not ESPN. That does nothing for me. Hit the notification bell, thumbs up, comment, whatever you like to do. Luke, please stay safe. And to all of you, stay safe out there. We'll catch you next week.
Salute.